Hello and welcome to this tour of the City of London. I'm a tour guide and I just thought, well, why not do a video online so that anyone in the world can get an idea. Maybe you're coming for a trip here and you want to know some things to see in the city. So yeah, it's going to be a 2-hour guide so that you can get an idea of some of the history and some of the sights. So I'm going to turn my camera around and this will be how I'll do the rest of the tour. So a bit of history first of all. That London is the first settlement is from the Roman invasion, so 2,000 years ago in the 40s AD. And a principal reason for its foundation was it's a very good place to cross the Thames. Just up there, 2 bridges along, where you can see maybe that red bus going across. Over there is London Bridge. And so where the Romans built London Bridge is still roughly where London Bridge is today. Easiest place to cross the Thames and a great place to supply your invading, conquering army with all the supplies from the continent. Because of this trade position, a strategic point, it became then the capital of the Roman province of Britannia, with roads stretching out from it. After a few hundred years, they built a huge wall around the city. We'll see some remnants of that wall, and it became a trading, powerful civic place. And we'll go on with the history of it as we walk on, heading towards St. Paul's up there. This is Millennium Bridge, by the way, where you get a lovely view over the Thames and the surrounding buildings down here. You can see then Tower Bridge right off in the distance over there. So the Roman power faded in about the 400s, early 400s AD, and the Roman army left. And people from north of Europe, the Angles, Saxons, Jutes, modern day Holland, Germany, Denmark, they moved across and they founded areas of control known as the Anglo-Saxons. But they didn't settle, it seems, immediately in the city of London, which seems like a good choice because it had this powerful stone wall around it, great infrastructure, all that stuff. The Anglo-Saxons, it seems, didn't really know how to work with this, and so they made a trade settlement called Londonvich, so London settlement, roughly where Covent Garden is today, or Trafalgar Square, that kind of area. But they got attacked by Vikings up the Thames, and so at the time of Alfred the Great, about 900 AD, he won a great victory against the Viking invaders, and he refortified London, and it became known as Londonburg, London Fortress. And he gave bits of land called soaks to his royal followers, who then, these are the beginnings of the different wards around the City of London, of which 25 exist today. So let me just say that the City of London is different than Greater London as a metropolitan area. The City of London today, I'll show you a map later, it roughly fits into the line of where the Roman wall actually was 2,000 years ago, which is pretty amazing. And it started to rule itself after Alfred the Great and the city was established. The city started to become very wealthy with the different merchants and craftsmen who formed trade associations called guilds, of which there are about 110, 120 to this day. But already in the 1500s there were sort of 50 or 60. And they became very powerful. For example, in about 1200, so 800 years ago, King John gave the City of London the right to choose its own leader, its own mayor. So this was a huge step in securing independence, the ability to rule themselves to a degree. Of course, recognizing the monarch as more powerful. But there's this interesting connection with the monarchy and the city, because the monarchy from the 1200s, it gets based quite permanently down at Westminster, just down the river from the city, and where Westminster Abbey is today, in the Houses of Parliament. And because they often needed the influence of the city, the military or the financial power on their side, they would go into some negotiations with the city. For example, okay, you can choose your own Lord Mayor. So there's still a Lord Mayor today in the City of London, which is different from the Mayor of London. And the current Lord Mayor is the 694th Mayor since the late 1100s. So it's a very, very long-lasting elected office. So the City of London today is still its own administrative region separate from the different boroughs of London. So based at the Guildhall, which we'll go to later, ruled by the Lord Mayor and a council of aldermen and councillors, 125 people who are all elected. It rules the city, and by rule I mean things like traffic, education, transport, business infrastructure, financial institutions. They can build, they have their own building scheme. They have to talk to the greater city of London area if they're going to build some crazy enormous skyscraper. There has to be some kind of agreement, but they have a degree of freedom and ruling their area, and this has been an autonomous area for a very long time, going back in recorded history to when William the Conqueror arrived in 1066. He couldn't conquer the city, and so he set up the Tower of London, and he said to them, a bit of writing that still exists, you can keep your ancient rights and privileges. So already 1,000 years ago, the tradesmen, the guilds, the merchants, the craftsmen, they had their own power to a degree, their own privileges with trade and self-government. So here we are outside St. Paul's Cathedral. So the very earliest mention of this is from the 600s AD, when a cathedral or a church was built here to St. Paul. And originally in wood, and then it got rebuilt in stone, and then it got rebuilt again, and there were a couple of fires, the last one being in the 1080s. There was a fire which burnt down the church that was here. And so as London was quite powerful by this point in the 1000s, and quite peaceful, had a lot of money, they decided to build, the biggest cathedral they could. And so Old St. Paul's was started in a mixture of Romanesque and Gothic style of architecture. And that had a huge spire. If you look online, old St. Paul's, it had a spire that went up about 40 meters taller than the current dome of this St. Paul's Cathedral. So it was absolutely enormous, one of the largest buildings in Europe, huge. But that spire got struck by lightning in the 1500s, which people saw as a sign of the bad use of the church, for example, because the St. Paul's was a gathering place, not just for religious things, but for things like paying off your debts and getting news that you could go into the church. And at the altar, that's where you would go to pay off your debts to debtors. So it's quite a sort of like earthly use for the cathedral as well. This is on the high. So then the old St. Paul's properly burnt down and got into a very ruinous state in the Great Fire of London in 1666. So Christopher Wren was commissioned to rebuild it, and he had to find a way to rebuild it with a kind of old English Gothic style, but also with a new Renaissance kind of enlightened Baroque style, as you can see, with these massive Greek Greco-Roman columns and this very flowery ornamental Baroque architecture. And so what he did, he struck on a mid-ground between something very modern and sophisticated and elegant, classical like this, but also with a long nave and certain of the design elements like the stained glass to create something in the kind of tradition of English church architecture. So it's a beautiful building, and it became pretty quickly a real symbol of London, surviving famously the Second World War, where the bombs didn't destroy it, although one of the bombs actually fell onto the church, but it was removed by a special team of men who threw it off and detonated it separately. So that one bomb would definitely have destroyed the church, the cathedral, and they were honoured for their merit. It's still a religious building today, still an active service every day. You can go in there for free at different times of the day. It's got an absolutely enormous dome, but that's actually an illusion in a way. The real dome is quite a lot lower, so that's sort of that height. And then Christopher Wren built a cone above that dome, and then another dome on top, so it looks like it's much bigger than it actually is when you're inside. Very impressive. So it's still an active building, and there are famous funerals and weddings that happen there. So Diana and Charles, for example. So let's go into St. Paul's Churchyard, and I'm just going to show you this map over here very quickly. So if you can see this, there's a red line that goes all the way around this central, roughly 1 square mile of the city. And this is the boundaries of the City of London Corporation. And this is their crest up here, the red cross on a white shield, so the red cross of St. George, with the two dragons and the Latin Domine Dirige Nos, God direct us. And you'll see that on many of the buildings around the city. So this is the boundary of the Roman wall, roughly going like this. You can see that this street here is actually called London Wall, and then it went down and joined down at the Tower of London. There are still some remnants of this wall. We'll see one of them down in a car park later. So it's pretty amazing that for 2,000 years, this rough boundary of this wall has delineated not just the geographic position of the city, but also the administrative region. There were various attempts by the Crown, especially in the 1600s, something called the Great Refusal, where, because London was expanding in the 1700s, the powers that be wanted the City of London to take control over this widening area. But they refused because, I mean, this would dilute their power that they had in the city, which was already very, very powerful. So here we are in St. Paul's Churchyard, with this beautiful English Baroque architecture all around us. It's a beautiful sight in the busy city. This is Easter Friday. It's a Good Friday, so I think the city will be quite quiet today in terms of business. Usually this is much more busy with actual businessmen. This used to be, the City of London, this roughly square mile, used to be where all the population and businesses of London lived. And then in the 1700s, especially with the Great Fire of London, which burnt away 75% of the city, a lot of the residents actually moved out to the expanding suburbs. And so the City of London authorities started to focus on business and trade. And that's still today what the main buildings and business here, is business. So especially financial services, foreign exchange, banking. It's very well placed between two different time zones. So many banks are situated here for that ease of commerce. If we look down at this little plaque here, we can see here stood Paul's Cross. So this area of the churchyard was actually one of the largest open spaces in the medieval city. And so there was a cross here, St. Paul's Cross, and this column over there is a sort of memorial to the plaque that once stood down there. And this was a gathering place for people to make decisions about the city, to be told news, to get a kind of group city conscience about something, called a folk moot. This was also the spot where many religious people would come and do sermons, especially during the Protestant Reformation in the 15 and 1600s. So many famous sermons given here. And also strange trials, like a guy being put on trial for witchcraft, was done here. So yeah, pretty cool spot. And just over there is a street, this is Paternoster Row. It got destroyed in the Second World War. A lot of bomb damages from the Second World War here. But this used to be the area where the booksellers and bookmakers would set up shop. So this was a thriving book market in the medieval London before in the 1600s, at the time of Shakespeare, also beyond. And so it's quite a atmospheric spot to think of Shakespeare walking along these streets down here, looking at books to inspire his plays. So if you get bored as I'm walking between things, you can always fast forward if you want, but I will be talking, I guess, most of the time. So, if you have the time and just want to sit back and watch this, then yeah, just watch it. I don't really know what I'm going to be saying, so you'll be surprised as much as I will. So down to the right is Cheapside. And this is an old word for market. Cheap is an old word for market. And so this street is now full of offices and shops, but it used to be a hugely bustling. This was like the Oxford Street of medieval London, and has many streets leading off from it, like Bread Street, Milk Street, Wood Street, which is where you could go to buy those kinds of commodities. So we're walking to the north side of St. Paul's Cathedral now. Just behind us, over in there, is the London Stock Exchange, which started in coffee shops in London in the 1600s. Pretty cool story in itself. There's the red cross of the City of London Corporation, which you can see there on many of the buildings. So yeah, the thing with the stockbrokers, they originally were trading around the Royal Exchange in London, which we'll see later. And one guy called John Castaigne, he was in coffee shops around this area in London. One of them was called Jonathan's Coffee Shop. And there he would be going to other coffee shops and other news places to find out the different prices of stocks and commodities like gold or cloth, whatever it was. And then he would put up these sheets of paper with these prices after each day. So the actual, an very early stock market and stock exchange. And this was in the late 1600s. So this is where the London Stock Exchange started, humble beginnings. And there's now this huge complex of buildings to our left. We're going over there to that ruined church, which is the Church of Christ Church, Greyfriars. Feel free to leave any comments, by the way, try not to be too mean. But things like where you're from, where you're watching from, if you've been to London before, it'll just make maybe a nice community beneath this video celebrating a pretty cool city. Okay, we're going to check the road is free. Yes. Sometimes I have to switch hands so the camera might shake a bit, so sorry about that. Hope no one gets dizzy from watching this. So here we have the church, Christ Church, Greyfriars. In the 1300s, it was a church within a Greyfriars monastery. The Greyfriars were Franciscan monks who wore grey habits, so they were the Grey Brothers. And then during the Reformation under Henry VIII, when a lot of the church lands were confiscated, sold off, this was then given to a different plot of land, a different owner, then also became a church, much bigger church than you see here today, which then burnt down in the Great Fire of London in 1666. And the church was rebuilt by Christopher Wren. You can see in this English Baroque style of architecture. And then the church was bombed in the Second World War, and the City of London Corporation decided to leave it as a testament to war. In the Times in the 1940s, there was an article that said something like, you look at these sites and you almost forget that the Blitz happened, so we leave these sites as a reminder of the destruction of war. But these wooden columns you can see here, these wooden columns are where the columns of the church used to be. So we're standing inside the church now. And up there, the tower actually survived the bombing and is now private residence. And also below there is a dentist clinic. So it's a pretty lovely place to come and chill, although they're really loud building works over there. But it's a lovely place to come and relax. Very atmospheric, the ruin. Okay, let's move on. Got a beautiful day for it, and yeah, this is quite quiet. It's interesting because I don't see many travelers around this part of town, because it's sort of, I think, seen as the financial center or the financial district, but it's just quite unique that it's both the financial district, very modern and businessy, but also the real core of London's history, the real core of London's history. Get a nice view of St. Paul's back over there. About to get run over. Whoa, don't want that to happen. Lovely building up here. This was a building used for the headquarters of the post office, built about 100 years ago. Over there is St. Bart's Hospital. You can, round the back of it, we're not going to go there today, but you can see very old church ruins from the original hospital, founded almost 1,000 years ago, dedicated to St. Bartholomew, and this is just outside the Roman city walls. Very ancient hospital. And we're going to go and get a bit of green space in this park in here. So here we're going into Postman's Park. As I mentioned, this building over here and other buildings in this area were for the use of the post office, which had expanded enormously in the 1800s. And so this is why it's called Postman's Park, and this is the biggest open area park in the city of London. Again, not the greater metropolitan area, but the city of London, this separate administrative region. But where we're standing originally is actually an ancient graveyard. So if you look over there, you can see the gravestones up against the wall, there, and they're actually everywhere lining the walls, because this is an ancient burial ground. People wanted to be buried in their home church in the city of London. Until the late 1800s, this was the case. And so there was a huge crisis, a huge problem, because there wasn't that much space in the ground. There were already quite a few layers of bodies in the ground. And so what they did was they would put a body on top of another one with a layer of soil, and then kind of pack new soil on top of it. And so the dead essentially rose out of the ground. And so you have this elevated area. You see it's higher than the street level. There's a funny quote from Charles Dickens in Our Mutual Friend, where it says, "The dead were conveniently and healthily elevated above the level of the living." So here you see these kids having a nice little lunch, not realizing they're sitting on quite a few thousand dead people. A little morbid there. And this is the church to St. Butolph, who was the patron saint of travellers. And this is just without the gate, Aldersgate. So it's called St. Butolph without Aldersgate. The church itself goes back, I think, 700 years or so. But this church building is from the 1780s here. And this is a fascinating survival of Victorian England in commemoration of heroic self-sacrifice. Because this park was so cherished by people in London and it was seen as very quaint, and they had to kind of fight to keep it from being developed, there was a decision to, a ceramicist actually paid for this monument himself in 1899 to commemorate people who had died giving their lives for someone else. So here you see, for example, James Hewers on September the 24th, 1878, was killed by a train at Richmond in the endeavour to save another man. And they're really very touching moments from the 1800s in London. And if we look at these trees are called London plane trees. And it's not known exactly when they were hybridized, but they are hybrids of two different kinds of tree. And in the 1700s, people realized that they do quite well in pollution. They can absorb microparticles in the air and they can push it out from their skin. So if you look closer at that tree, you see it's got all those flecks down it. So this is the tree essentially cleaning itself. And they also do well with not very much root space. So they're perfect trees for city pollution. So in the Victorian era and in the 1700s, they were planted absolutely everywhere. So that's why you see all these London plane trees around, because they're brilliant air cleaners. That's not the plane. those two big ones are. Some of the earliest are in Berkeley Square in Mayfair, which were planted in 1789. One problem with them is that when they flower, they have these very annoying seeds which get inside your nose and can be real chaos to allergies. So if you have that when you come to London, you can blame London plane trees. Here you can see all the gravestones piled up over there from when this was an active graveyard. Not a very fun job to come and redevelop this park in the 1800s. Okay, we're leaving Postman's Park now. So over there is the Museum of London, in that building over there, which is a fantastic free museum all about London's history, including the skull of a rhino that they found in central London from when woolly rhinos were wandering here hundreds of thousands of years ago. Pretty crazy. So if we were still seeing the Roman and the medieval walls, the medieval period, they reused the Roman walls, which have been since cleared, then we would be approaching this gate, so Alders Gate. We would be coming up the road here, about to go inside this Roman wall with the Roman gates around it. But that doesn't survive anymore. The wall was still a defensive feature into the 1600s. But was taken down in the 1700s for traffic and for building opportunities. And the Romans built a few gates in the wall, like Ludgate and Newgate and Oldgate. So some of the areas in the city that are still called that, like Newgate and Ludgate, are because those were the entrances through the fortified wall in the Roman city. When Rome was very young, when Londinium was very young, about 60 AD, so really a new town, it was attacked and destroyed by Queen Boudica, who was an Iceni chieftainess who was very, very angry at the Roman invasion and the way they treated her and her family and her tribe, that she burnt down the city of London, which obviously wasn't that well defended at the time. You can still see that layer of ash in the London archaeology. So here we're walking down Gresham Street. We're coming up to two lovely guild buildings, or livery company halls. So some of these go back into recorded documentation to the 12 or 1300s, when they're given a royal charter by the monarch. For example, the fishmongers are one of the oldest, whose hall still survives. So this one here, this large one here, is the goldsmiths. So about 500 years ago, there was an official list made of the guilds in terms of their importance and their economic influence, and the top 12 were called the Great 12. So they were people like the grocers, who dealt in spices, the mercers, who were merchants, the drapers, dealing in wool and cloth. Wool was a major export from London to places like north of Europe, where it was then processed, and the goldsmiths, who worked with bullion. So the guilds today, they still all exist, which is pretty amazing. And many of them have halls like this, some older, some in the same place for hundreds of years, but the building has been destroyed. This goldsmiths one has been here since the 1700s. That one just beyond it is called the Wax Chandler's Hall. People who worked with beeswax candles, which was the more high quality candles for churches and aristocracy. Whereas tallow candles, the tallow chandlers have their own hall in a different place, was for the kind of more common household use. So some of the guilds are still involved in their trade. For example, the goldsmiths and the chandlers, for example, they still do things with beeswax and sponsoring various programs, sponsoring and paying for people to do stuff, apprenticeships, sponsorships. The goldsmiths, they still check the quality of gold, and they have the hallmark. So this is where the word hallmark comes from, that in this hall, their mark would be stamped on the gold with its degree, with its quality. So that's where the word hallmark comes from. And still to this day, every year, there's a ceremonial testing of the British currency called the Trial of the Pyx, which used to be held in Westminster Abbey and then is now held in the Goldsmiths Hall, where they sort of ceremonially check and control the quality of the British currency. Of course, that used to be much more important when the currency was actually a kind of more precious metal. To become a member of one of these guilds, these ancient guilds, various different ways. You can be invited by a family member. You can be invited, seems to be the most common way, is to be invited by sort of two other people who you might know from a business that you're working in the city, or some other cause. You're expected to be a member for life and to contribute to its charitable causes, because most of these guilds, as I said, they're not anymore actual trade associations, where if you want to become a member of the goldsmiths, you have to do an apprenticeship in gold work or something like that. But they're mainly charitable bodies, and they support the different elements of their trade. They also uphold the ceremonial history of the City of London, and they're, of course, brilliant networking platforms. The more modern guilds, like the pharmacists or the actually, I'm not sure if the pharmacist is one, but the sort of information technologists or the architects, those guilds now are networking and business guilds, really, trade associations where you have to be, or I guess it'd be helpful if you were actually in that trade to become a member of one of them today. So I think there are 110 guilds today, so more than the medieval era, which is this brilliant continuation of this tradition. But the numbers, the details might be a little off there. Sorry about that. So here we come to a bit of bomb damage from the Second World War, where you can see they've imposed this map of this image of the Roman wall onto it. In the Second World War, bombs fell here along with many other parts of the city, and it revealed these bits of Victorian brickwork here, but also the line of the Roman wall which surrounded London. So there you can see it down there. You can see this stone down at the bottom, a large tower here, which is one of the Guardian Towers, and a bit of wall also going off this way. So this was a fort in the early Roman city, and then when they built the huge stone wall around Londinium, this then became incorporated into that wall. So this was the fort area where the soldiers could guard the city. It's pretty amazing to see the line of this wall. You can see the line of the Roman part down there, and then the later sort of 1800 stonework up there, people still using the wall as the basis for their shops and stuff like that. This is quite a nice little map, by the way. It shows you the city of London, the line of the Roman wall, where we are up here, and this light grey area is the area that was destroyed in 1666 by the Great Fire of London. So a huge amount of the area of London. So yeah, this is Second World War bomb damage, which has been left open, and part of it down there where those metal stairs are run by the Worshipful Company of Plasterers. So the livery companies or the guilds have this name, the Worshipful Company of, before them. So there's the crest of the plasterers, people who worked and originally regulated the trade in plastering. So this is the garden that they can use for their events and dinners and charitable fundraisers. And down the end we can see a bit of more medieval stonework down there, but still on the line of the Roman wall. It's just amazing that this wall would have been such a feature of Roman life from 200 AD right up until the 1700s. It's just amazing. Different eras. Okay, this road up here is actually called London Wall because this is where the wall would have then stretched out that way, being the northern boundary. And this section of wall we were just looking at is on a street called Noble Street. This is quite a cute little spot here, cute little garden, but this is St. Olev's. This is where used to be a church to St. Olaf, or St. Olev, who was a Norwegian king who helped the Saxon British king to retake London from the Danes. And because of this help, and then they attacked London Bridge, and that's where this rhyme, London Bridge is falling down. This was in the early 1000s AD. So Olaf is then celebrated, and there are various churches to Saint Olav, who was originally Norwegian Olaf, which is quite a nice connection. There's also a plaque down there. You can see William Shakespeare had lodgings near here in 1604 at the house of Christopher and Mary Mountjoy. Okay, so let's go on. I'm going to go around the corner this way, back down Noble Street. I've been learning about London's history for the last sort of 10 or 15 years, just reading a lot, being really interested in it. And about 4 years ago, I started doing tours in and around the city in different museums and galleries in the area of the city, of Greater London. And I've always loved just the city of London itself, this little 1 square mile right in the heart of it, which on days like this is totally deserted or really quite empty. And considering this was once the kind of the hub of one of the world's largest empires, is just amazing, really. This is the Pewterers' Hall, people who worked with pewter, and they're still involved in the pewter trade, a kind of metal. So there is still a trade of pewter making in Britain, and these guys are heavily involved in it. Inside these cute halls, many of the liveries will have a big hall inside where they'll have the charitable dinners, where you get dressed up in white tie. The freeman of you can become a liveryman in this company, in this guild, if you get accepted, and then you're expected to donate to the charitable causes as well. Some of the guilds have an annual payment you have to make, and others the payment you can join for free. And they'll have a master who's elected each year. They'll have something called a beadle, who's an ex-military man who will be announcing the different things at the dinners, where he'll suddenly slam his staff down and shout, "My lords, ladies," and then talk about whatever the announcement is. And this garden here is actually another old church. You can see the gravestones over on the edge there, lining the wall. This is a very ancient church graveyard, and you can see some of the heritage care in the city that this office building had to build round the tree in this ancient church graveyard. It's such a cool sight, this old world of the guilds and the trade associations still there, small amidst these great modern skyscrapers. Here we are in St. Alban's Court, where we're approaching what used to be a church dedicated to St. Alban. And here we have the surviving tower of this church. So this is a really amazing little site in the middle of the city amidst all these modern buildings, and then you get this amazing Gothic revival tower built in the late 1600s and still surviving. So this used to be a church, and actually records of a church being here go back to the 900s AD, so it's really, really old. But the body of the church got bombed in the Second World War. It was rebuilt after the Great Fire of London, where it burnt down by Christopher Wren, in a more Gothic style of architecture, and then was rebuilt. I'm getting all confused here, trying to film and talk. The body of the church was completely destroyed in the Second World War, and so just the tower was left, and it's a beautiful monument. It's now, I think it has been residences in the past, and at least I know for sure that there's a company here, based here, at least their address says they're based there. I don't know if they have offices inside, but it's a pretty badass place to have an office or to bring a date home. This is me. Yeah, pretty cool. You can see the bells on the door there. And this building here is the headquarters of the City of London Police, which are a separate police force than the London Metropolitan Police. On their uniform they have a different crest than the Metropolitan Police. They don't have the crown of the Queen, the monarch. Well, not the Queen anymore. They have the emblem of the City of London Corporation, which is this one. Hey, good timing. And we're now walking down Love Lane, where I guess you can imagine what happened on this street, why it's called Love Lane. A lot of the streets reflect the use that they were in at the time. This is actually a nicer named street. There was one called Grope Seaward Lane. I'm not going to say the C word, but yeah, Grope Seaward Lane, which is pretty gross. And then they were sort of quietly changed to more fancy things. So here we are coming up to Aldermanbury Square. The aldermen were people who would rule the 25 different wards of the city, and there are still 25 different wards, and there are still 25 aldermen who are elected by people in the city. The people, by the way, there are about 8,000 residents, but there are about 40 or 50,000 members of businesses who are eligible to vote as well. So there's a voting system electing the council and the court of aldermen, who make the decisions for the city, who are elected by people working in the city and also those few people who live here. So it's a very strange and interesting mix of two different things, the businesses and the residents, who both benefit from living here, whether it's their livelihood, they actually have a house here, or it's their business that will benefit from the support and the growth supported by the governing body. So this is a beautiful little ancient graveyard again, with the old church that used to be in there, St. Mary Aldermanbury, which got destroyed in the Second World War, and actually the stones got taken to Fulton, Missouri, to Winchester College, Westminster College, where the church was rebuilt as it was. But there's a statue of Shakespeare here because two of his dear friends, John Hemming and Henry Condell, as you can see there, they were actually buried underneath our feet in this graveyard, and they lived around here too. And when Shakespeare died, they actually got together and had his plays published. It's called the First Folio. So it's due to these guys who are buried underneath us that we have so much surviving from Shakespeare. And just on that note, I'm just going to read the last few lines from Shakespeare's famous sonnet about "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day," when it talks about the eternity. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Okay, let's move on down this way. So this is now Aldermanbury, this area of the city called Aldermanbury. These buildings over here, this is the back of the Guildhall. So this is the actual Houses of Parliament equivalent for the City of London, where all the admin is done, the offices are based. It looks very kind of modern and a bit imposing, but on the other side, which we'll go to in a sec, we'll see the ancient building of the Guildhall, where the actual hall is itself. It's a beautiful building. Lots of construction going on at the moment. I've got a little interesting story actually about these bollards you can see in the street, because their design is still done to this day to look like cannons with the cannonball coming out the top. And originally these were actual real cannons captured from French during the Napoleonic Wars, the Battle of Trafalgar especially, and they were put in the streets in London as kind of war trophies, if you like. And that trend has still stuck, so they're still designed to look like captured war cannons, which is pretty interesting. And there are a couple of surviving cannons actually left. So if you look online about surviving cannons in London streets, hopefully you'll be pinpointed to where you can go and see one. Okay, there's a bit of construction going on here, so the street's a bit kind of manky and built up, but you can bear with me, or you can just fast forward. yeah, as you like. It's a beautiful day. Oh, by the way, this hall behind me, this is the Brewers Hall. This is the company of people in charge of the quality of beer in the City of London. And they actually still have an official role. Someone fills it every year who is the official controller of tasting ale. It's, ceremonial these days, but this is the ancient Brewers Hall and the worshipful company of brewers. So we're on this street called London Wall, which roughly follows the northern edge of the ancient Roman city. It's on the other side of that ruin there, and you can see some of the wall over there with the medieval stonework in it. And this is a beautiful survivor from the 1300s of a hospital for blind beggars. It's called the Elsing Tower. A guy called Elsing had it built, and just this tower part of the church survives. But it's a beautiful atmospheric kind of ruin in the midst of these, again, very modern buildings and this busy road. Okay, we're going to walk down along here, and yeah, again, if you want to fast forward, just do that, because it's a bit of a strange little street here. Okay, sorry about that jump. I've just fast forwarded along that quite barren bit of street. Here we are on the corner of London Wall and Coleman Street, where you can see the Guild of Armourers over there with their amazing crest on top of the soldiers. This is the Armourers Guild. And we're going to go down into a car park, and I'm going to show you a section of the London Wall. And again, I'm just going to fast forward because it's quite a long walk through some pretty dank corridors. So here we are in this car park, approaching this amazingly well preserved bit of the Roman wall. So this was built about 200 AD with thousands of tons or millions of tons, I guess, of Kentish ragstone, which is the stone here you can see on the outside, and then those red bands which you can see there. This red tiling, this was a way the Romans used to bond the stones and the mortar together. It absorbs moisture and a very strong element. It also gives it a nice kind of aesthetic look to it. It's just amazing that this bit of stone wall has survived for almost 2,000 years, hidden presumably in the basement of other buildings, and then luckily preserved here in a car park. And you can see this rough fence around it. So the Museum of London are, I think, on the way to do some more preserving work. But I want to read you an Anglo-Saxon poem called The Ruin, or part of it, where in the 700s AD, these Anglo-Saxon settlers would look at these ancient ruins from the Roman world and wonder just what they were. So I'm going to read this to you first in the Anglo-Saxon, or the Old English, and then in the English. Rathlich is this Wielston weerde gebruiken, Beerstede boersten, brosnath intergewurk, Rofas sind gehörene, Hurge Turas, Hrungejat berofen, Grim und Lima. Skjaarde Skoerburga Skorene, Gedrorene, Elde Undriatone, Uurtgrap Hafath Waldend Weerten Forwirene, Geliorene, Heid Gripa Grusan, of Hundknea Weertode gewitten. Oft Thes wag Gebad, Regar und Redfar, Riche efter Offrum, Aufstunden und Stormen, Stiep Giap Gedreas. Wondrous is this wallstead, wasted by fate, battlements broken, giants' work shattered. Roofs are in ruin, towers destroyed. Broken the barred gate, rime on the plaster. Walls gape, torn up, destroyed, consumed by age. Earth grip holds the proud builders, departed, long lost, and the hard grasp of the grave, until 100 generations of people have passed. Often this wall outlasted, hoary with lichen, red-stained, withstanding the storm, one rain after another. The high arch has now fallen. Okay, we're going to go back out now into the daylight. So here we are back. There's the Guild of Armourers and Braziers over there, with the spear going through the lamp, and maybe a better view up there of the armour on display. So we're walking down Coleman Street, and we're now heading back into the ancient walled city of London and heading towards the Guildhall. So this very cute building here is the site of the Worshipful Company of Girdlers, people who made belts and girdles. And in fact, when a new monarch is crowned, the girdlers used to directly make or outsource the work for a new belt or girdle, and they still do. So they're still involved in girdle making for official reasons, but are much more now a charity supporting various branches of the army and different charitable causes. And I've been in there a couple of times through a friend and had a dinner there in the hall for a charity event, and it was lovely, very atmospheric. But in this beautiful little spot, they've owned this bit of land. That was one of the benefits of being royally chartered by the crown, is that you could then own that bit of land for perpetuity. So they've had this bit of land since the mid 1400s, but this is a building built after the bombings of the Second World War. And these huge buildings around it, they have to pay a sunlight tax to this little building down here, which is pretty cool. Okay, let's move on. Oops, sorry for that shake. So as I was mentioning, only about 8,000 people actually live here in certain more residential areas like Barbican and some other areas, but about 500,000 people plus commute here every weekday for work. And a lot of that work is the financial services, so investment banking, foreign exchange, currencies, and insurance, things like that. It's just amazing how deserted it is, isn't it? On these holidays and on the weekends actually as well, because it's just so business orientated. So yeah, if you want to see this bustling with workers, then come here Monday to Friday. But for a quiet stroll around like this one, following this route as much as you can if you like, now that you have the video, then yeah, weekend. So we're going to head down Mason's Avenue, which is a lovely little kind of almost Dickensian looking street with a pub here from the early 1800s in its original cute little building called the Old Dr. Butler's Head. And this was a guy who made a concoction mixing ale with different herbs to make something called a purging ale, which was basically a very heavily laxative drink. I assume for medical purposes, not to go in and then just end up, emptying out either end. But yeah, a cute little pub, and again on weekdays, very busy with businessmen and women having a drink at lunch and in the evening. Okay, so here we're coming up to the outer parts of the Guildhall. These are the outer buildings here, and I'll talk a bit more about it when we go inside. So yeah, the runnings of the city was down to the aldermen of the wards, the Lord Mayor, and also the sheriffs, the shire reeve, people who would be in charge partly of actually collecting taxes, for example, that were owed to different peoples, and overseeing courts. So here they have the Mayor and City of London court, so they still have their own court system. In order to become a Lord Mayor, you have to have been an alderman, so someone preferably in a guild, in a livery company, so kind of putting in a lot of time and work into the city and the traditions of the city. To become an alderman, and you have to also have been a sheriff, and then you can then become eligible to be a Lord Mayor. And the Lord Mayor is elected, a new Lord Mayor every year, elected in the Guildhall, which is this building coming up on the right. And there have been 2 women Lord Mayors in the last few decades. So it is open to both sexes. So here we are in the Guildhall front courtyard and this beautiful medieval building here. I say medieval because the stonework at the back is from the 1400s. So it survived in part, it survived the Great Fire of London and the bombings of the Second World War. And this front bit here is from the 1700s, so a kind of modern, at the time, fashionable revamp of the opening area. So this long bit at the back, this is actually the Guild Hall, where every year, towards the end of every year, the different liverymen from all the guilds will gather together, and then they will vote for a new Lord Mayor. It's not that political, but it can be a struggle to see who is who. And usually they're politically independent, these people. So it's just about running the kind of business and the residential part of the City of London, as opposed to, Labour or Conservative values. This is an amazing building because this is a civic building. It's secular. It's not religious. It might look religious, but this is sort of the power of the merchants, the power of the tradesmen, the craftsmen, combining together all these different guilds, combining in the 1400s enough resources to have this amazing stone building built. And many famous events have happened here, feasts with the monarch and speeches and all kinds of important moments in London's history have happened inside this area. And this central courtyard was expanded, I think, in the 70s or 80s, so I'm not sure of the exact date. And when they were doing digging for the groundwork, they found the outline of a Roman amphitheatre. So this is what this large black circle is, going round and going underneath the Guildhall Art Gallery there, which is free to go into. And in the basement, you can see the entranceway to this amphitheatre. So this was a huge stone amphitheatre in the Roman city of Londinium. Quite nice that we've got all these people coming across now, gladiators and slaves heading towards their gruesome death. Ooh, no, shouldn't say that. Yeah, so it's pretty amazing, and this may be why the Guildhall is here, because there was this huge open space in the Middle Ages, the ruins of this amphitheatre, and maybe this was a good place for the guilds to actually gather and make this their base of gathering to make decisions. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, every year the Lord Mayor is elected, and then we'll do the Lord Mayor's parade when they get into a fancy gold carriage, and all the liverymen process, and they go through the city, processing, announcing the new Lord Mayorship. Lord Mayor is not a paid role. You're actually expected to kind of contribute towards being Lord Mayor for a year, and you can only run for 1 year. This is the Guildhall Church, St. Lawrence Jewry. It's just been cleaned, so it looks beautifully marble-like. I believe the stone is Portland stone. I'm sure someone might correct me on that, but yeah, I think it's Portland stone. Very classical design. It's called St. Lawrence Jewry because the area we're about to walk into, one of the streets is called Old Jewry, because in the Norman city, so from 1060s until 1290, William the Conqueror actually invited Jews to come from Rouen in the north of France to come and work in the city of London because they were very effective money lenders. Christians weren't allowed to lend money with interest. That was called usury. And so it was the role of the Jewish traders. And the Jews had many connections around Europe, so they could actually have access to resources and capital that other people didn't have access to. So they became the money lenders. But they got expelled in 1290. They were very unpopular in England. Basically, the kings just bled them for all of their money. They were the property of the kings. They weren't subject to normal laws and rights of other people. And so they were basically bled dry, and then they were just expelled. So it's a pretty nasty bit of history, but they were very important for raising money in early Europe. Here's a very ancient street called Ironmonger Lane, which has a very narrow street plan. One sec. Sorry, the motorbikes were so loud. Yeah, so Ironmonger Lane used to be where, you did things with iron, but it's not like that anymore. So what I was saying was that's a very ancient street route in the city of London. It's just this amazing contrast, right, between the old buildings, and we're entering into the area called Bank, with many of the world's big banks having offices here for access to skilled people to hire, ease with which you can communicate with the other banks. You're all in the same time zone, and there's a lot of expertise and knowledge in the City of London financial services. So many of the world's big banks have an office here. Here you can see the street called Old Jewry. So this was the Jewish quarter down here until 1290, when they were expelled. About 2,000, they think, Jews left or forced out, and they only officially were allowed back in during the Commonwealth in the 1650s under Cromwell. Sorry, this is me changing hands again. So here we are outside the Bank of England. So this institution goes back to 1694, when England was at war with France, and they really needed funds. And so there was this idea going around to have a privately funded company with investors putting their money in to give loans to the government, huge loans with high interest rates, and then of course backed by the security that you're giving a loan to the government. So then in return, the government gave them collateral, government debt, which is backed by the government's, taxation and stuff like that. So this was a pretty safe, low risk way of starting a business and getting returns on your money, and eventually your money back, right? So this is an interest profit. So this became a really important institution, and it was successful, and it became trustworthy. And so many large loans were made out of the Bank of England. It became a really important institution, one of the earliest modern banks of its kind, to be able to have, so the government and other institutions could have access to this huge pools of money, which didn't have to come from taxation directly, an unpopular thing to do. The building has been here since the 1730s, and it got expanded over the last 300 years. Down beneath us are the vaults, where there's a lot of gold. So yeah, lots of gold stored underneath us. The banking system today is really at the helm of British financial stability, controlling interest rates and the financial stability of the whole British economy. It has to be, of course, communicating with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, but it has a degree of autonomy through its board of directors. So this is a very important institution financially. I should say that within 10 days or so of bank being founded in 1694, the government got a loan of £1.2 million, and then a further £300,000 the next year. And that's then, today that's hundreds of millions. and with that they could build a navy. So it's really amazing, you know, how these moments are really quite profound. Suddenly having access to 1.2 million, you know, as long as you pay it off over time. And they did. So by the early 1700s, the government had paid back this original loan. So the system worked. There's a beautiful restaurant and series of bars and restaurants in there called the Ned, which is a hotel, used to be a bank. It's a beautiful place for a drink if you're ever in this area, the Ned. Okay, so here we're coming up to Cornhill, which is a high part of the city. Sorry, I made a mistake earlier. St. Paul's is on Ludgate Hill, not Cornhill. Before anyone screams at me in the comments, I'm sorry about that mistake. Here we are at Cornhill, which is another high point of the city, and we're standing outside this amazing building here called Mansion House. I'll tell you more about it when we get around the side. So here we have Mansion House, and this was built in the 1740s and 1750s for official house and conference rooms and halls and meeting places for the Lord Mayor of London. And that's where he or she will live for the 1 year they're in office. And inside there are various different halls where they host all kinds of foreign dignitaries and the other guilds and the other livery companies, and charitable events and all kinds of things happen in this building. And outside the front they've got this Greek pediment showing the city of London up there in the middle, apparently stepping on Envy. There you can see her stepping on Envy, because London's such a powerful city and we're just proud of it, this kind of sentiment, with Father Thames there with water gushing out from a pot beside him. So things glorifying the commercial enterprising power of the city of London. That's the walkie-talkie skyscraper in the distance over there.
I'd like to point out that the females weren't.
Okay, so let's head over there to the Royal Exchange. It's a pretty amazing view again when you get this intense contrast between the modern towers of glass, you know, reflecting, absorbing the sky, and then these ancient, at the time, sort of skyscrapery impressive buildings from the more distant past. So I'll tell you more about the Royal Exchange when we get a little closer. This is a statue of the Duke of Wellington, which was erected in 1844, made out of melted down captured French cannons. So yeah, pretty cool statue. It's actually sitting on top of an underground air vent, so it's serving a nice little dual purpose there. So if you remember earlier, we were on a street called Gresham Street, named after a guy called Thomas Gresham, who for part of his life was a financier and a tradesman merchant in Antwerp in the 1500s. And in Antwerp he saw and worked in a building called the Bourse, which was a gathering meeting place for merchants where they would do business a couple of times a day. There'd be like official business hours. And this was a great way, he saw, of concentrating the merchant activity. And so then one was built here at his instigation, and other people contributed to destroying the buildings on this site and building the Royal Exchange, which was then a place that the public could come in and also buy all kinds of luxury products from all over the world that were coming in. But also it was a place for different businessmen, merchants, people to exchange bills of sale and all the kinds of things that could encourage business and enterprise. Before this was built, people were meeting down there on Lombard Street, and they were just milling around in the street. And if you needed to finance, say, an expedition to the New World, you'd have to go out onto the street and kind of ask around, and it was sort of a way quite inefficient. So suddenly you had this building here where you could come for all of these different business needs. So this became a real hub of London's commercial kind of globalizing, the world of capitalism and merchant activity. The building then burnt down, it got rebuilt again, and it burnt down again. And so it got rebuilt in the 1800s, and this is the style here, this Greek style in the 1800s. It's now not a kind of trading floor anymore because Lloyd's Insurance, Lloyd's of London used to be based in there for 100 years or so. And this is now just luxury shops. It's also used for offices, but it's a beautiful interior with a large courtyard in the middle. And up at the top in the pediment, you can see a personification of commerce with the quote, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof," with all of the different nations trading with the city of London sculpted up there. This is the entrance to the Bank of England up here. Very imposing, monumental. This is a statue of a man called James Greathead, who invented the use of a tunneling system to be able to tunnel underground more efficiently, to be able to lay down the first underground train tracks in London in the mid to late 1800s. So yeah, impressive invention, and he named it the Tube, which is why we still call it that today. So yeah, I'm sorry if this has been a bit shaky at times, or maybe all the time. If the video does well and stuff, I'll probably invest in a better camera holding device so that it's steadier. But we'll see. Maybe people like it when it's more walky. I don't know. These amazing skyscrapers up there. Wow. Here's the side of the Royal Exchange with all of these luxury shops along each side. Okay, if we walk down a second to Change Alley, this is what I was talking about earlier with the first London Stock Exchange. Now we have all electronic systems, and we know the price of stocks and commodities like lead or oil or whatever it is. But back in the late 1600s, this guy called John Castaigne was visiting different coffee shops, in particular this one called Jonathan's Coffee House, and then at the end of each day making a careful list of all the different prices of stocks and commodities that people would then trade with, buy and sell. He would then put these up on the shop. So this became the coffee shop to go to when you wanted information about the prices of stocks and commodities, sort of the early beginnings of the London Stock Exchange. And down that street there's a little plaque, which we won't go to now, the site of Lloyd's Coffee House. So this was a coffee shop where they would have runners bring information about the different ships coming in and out. So this is where you would go to get your ships insured, and this then developed into Lloyd's of London, still functioning today as a insurance market. Hear the bells. Ooh. So we're walking further along Cornhill, and we're soon going to take a little side street into some of the narrow back alleys.
I know. They need to know it.
Okay, down we go. This is into Ball Court. This gets very Dickensian in here. So here are some lovely old buildings housing an ancient restaurant called Simpson's Tavern, which was founded back in the 1750s. So it's a really ancient dining and drinking place, which is still open to this day. It's not open today on Easter Friday, but again, if you come here in the weekday, there are people standing out on these barrels, eating and drinking. Lovely slice of older London. Ooh. Aha. Tour group. I'll try and avoid their faces by looking up so they don't get upset. Here we are at the site of the Jamaica Wine House. This was actually the site of the first coffee shop in London in the 1600s. And coffee shops became a very popular thing because you could go and sit in this space and not pay that much and get a lot of coffee, and you would sit there and hear the news. You would discuss things. You would people watch. You could start businesses. I mentioned about the London Stock Exchange and Lloyd's of London. In a coffee shop, it's where the first newspaper started. It became a really popular replacement to pubs and alcohol. And just behind it is this lovely church called St Michael, Cornhill. And if we look over here, we can see the garden of it and the body. There are quite a few churches like this in London, which are just hidden behind a street front. You wouldn't really know they're there. And then, beautiful old churches. St Michael's Cornhill has been here for hundreds of years, and rebuilt at the time of Christopher Wren after the Great Fire. St Michael's Alley, the Bell Inn Yard. Okay. Wow. So here we're coming up to Leadenhall Market. This tiny little building over there, or open front to the building. These enormous construction works going on all around us. Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, no, it's quite fun going. Let's go. Okay, so here we are at the entrance to Leadenhall Market. This is a building from the late 1800s, but the market goes back to the 1300s when it was a meat and a poultry market, so properly selling meat and other kinds of food. Nowadays it's a series of restaurants, pubs, and also shops, including butchers and then cheese shops and stuff like that. But it's just a beautiful Victorian building in this sort of Dutch style, really ornate. We're going to go inside and look at some of the lovely decorations. This is actually the site of the Roman Forum, this huge area around here, of which Leadenhall Market is in part of it. So this was it's funny that it's now a kind of gathering, markety business place, and also was the main business marketing place 2,000 years ago almost, in the Roman city of Londinium. If you look online at Roman Forum London, you can see how large it really was. Okay, we're going to go inside in a sec. I'm just going to wait for the traffic. So this was also a filming place for the Harry Potter films. When they go for the first time to the Leaky Cauldron, they come into Leadenhall Market. You see a lot of the decoration is all very floral and sort of vegetal, with different images all around it. Including up there in the middle, the cross of the City of London Corporation. And you see these hooks up on the side. See up there all those hooks? So that's where they used to hang the carcasses of meat to be sold. So the hooks are still there. And there used to be a Spanish restaurant that had its jamons hanging outside of it, just over there, but I don't see them today. So here's a big wine and cheese shop. So again, on weekdays this area is very busy with all of the workforce of the city. You see these enormous dragons up there, this animal symbol of the City of London Corporation, with the red cross of St. George on their wings. Beautiful space, beautiful space. Lovely place to come for a quiet drink or a bite to eat in the middle of your tour. Come to the Lamb Tavern, a really old pub, obviously a name reflecting the fact that it was in a meat market from about 1780.
Yes.
So here we are outside Lloyd's of London building, also called the Inside Out building, finished in the 1980s, to a design where all of the facilities are on the outside of the building, like the piping, the stairways, the elevators. These glass elevators that go up and down were the first of their kind in England. Quite a spectacle at the time. So that inside the whole space is just an enormous open hall, used as the rooms for Lloyd's of London market, which is so lots of different insurance companies work in there. It's actually the earliest building to be Grade 1 listed, and earliest in the sense of the most recently built building to now have a Grade 1 historical listing. Pretty amazing. Obviously a pretty controversial building. Some people think it's really not very nice looking and there's a sort of ruins the city of London, but other people think it's really cool and kind of steampunk and modern. Certainly a talking point. So I find this view really incredible, because here we are with the Lloyd's building on the left, this amazing kind of strange architecture all on the outside. And you've got the Gherkin, this skyscraper there, and then the Scalpel, that pointy one there, and other skyscrapers here. And then just down there, which we'll go to in a sec, you've got this 500-year-old church called St Andrew's Undershaft. It's just an amazing contrast between the old and the new. This area of London is a lot to do with the insurance companies. Again, as London's historic place with a global empire around it, it became a hub for different areas of the world to centralize certain aspects of their business, like financial money exchange, for example. So if you're an American company and you want to get money in a different currency from halfway across the world, then the services of the City of London can be a much better way of doing that, with greater amounts that you can exchange more easily, more efficiently than elsewhere. So these kinds of financial services, and London's position as a global power, with the 0 GMT time, makes things much easier. Gosh. Amazing buildings, really. So yeah, isn't this an amazing contrast? St Andrew's Undershaft is from the 1530s, original older church on the spot, and this undershaft is because just outside, until the 1500s, there was a shaft, a maypole, which people would dance around every year for spring, and then it got taken down as a kind of pagan sin, pagan worshipping. So that doesn't happen anymore. But that's why it's called Undershaft, because it was right underneath or next to this maypole shaft. But yeah, these contrasts in London are really, really fantastic. And so guys, I'm going to end the tour there. So about 90 minutes. Yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And feel free to subscribe to this channel. I'm sure I'll be doing more videos. And yeah, hope you enjoyed and hope to see you soon. Bye.